So we are going to be talking about chapter 14, interpersonal conflict. So we know now that interpersonal conflict is talking about interpersonal relationships, which of course are relationships that are actually interconnected, right? The ones that we spend time with, that we kind of rely on the other person, people that we do life with. So interpersonal conflict. So first and foremost, we need to understand that conflict is a natural part of relationships. It's a bad thing to have conflict. And I think that we've grown up thinking that conflict is bad. One, because of how we, and in a second, we're going to define conflict and how we think about it. But one of the things that it does talk about, like we think of it, you think of conflict negatively. Like when I say, oh, they're in conflict, you're not like, oh, they're really working things out, right? You're probably thinking, oh gosh, they're having a fight, they're not doing well, right? So the first thing that we need to understand in understanding and framing our minds around conflict is that it is a natural part of relationships and that it is going to happen. You probably had a relationship in your life, or either a friend or a romantic relationship, and you've had your first fight. Right. And that's not actually a bad thing, because like the second point says, it can foster growth if it's managed well. Sometimes I've been in relationships where we've had a fight and we don't manage that conflict well. In other relationships, we manage the conflict very well in a very mature way. And it's wonderful because then the relationship grows and there's no bitterness attached. Both people can grow from it. So it's really important to actually learn from this chapter, how do you communicate during a conflict, to understand how other people communicate during conflicts so that you can manage that well. And then communication is both the source of the conflict and the remedy for the conflict. A lot of times, communication is what makes the whole thing start. I mean, sometimes conflict happens because someone does just, I don't know, takes your food. If you have a roommate takes your food, that might start a conflict, right? But you could still say that's communication, because the person should come to you, right, and say like, hey, I don't have any food. I'm going to the grocery store later, but can I have this now? And I'll get you some when I go to the grocery store, right? So that could still be communication based. But basically it's saying that communication can often start the fight or start the conflict. And then it can also, though, be the remedy. So if it does start, remember that you don't have to just stay in this place of conflict. You can use your communication skills to foster growth, to make the conflict go in a better way, and to work together. So it can also be a remedy. And then it makes management a challenge. If you've ever been in a management position, or if you ever intend to be in a management position, conflict between you and your employees or the other employees, it's really difficult, and you're kind of in charge of managing that. And we already talked about leadership and how important communication is to leadership. Part of being a leader is managing conflict. And then need skill development to deal with conflict well. So you really need to develop your skills. I think it's one thing that you kind of just think, oh, we fight or we don't fight, we have conflict or we don't have conflict. But that's not necessarily the case. You can develop skills to manage that, to kind of understand. So you don't have to go down into holes of conflict that you don't really need to go down. And then you can also learn how to deal with it when it does arise, because of course it will. And then also I want to say about this management a challenge. Understand that communication goes both ways. So you may be trying really hard, but it's still going to be difficult to manage this conflict, because the other person has to decide to also be on your same page with trying to manage it. So understand it's not always going to go smoothly, but the more you try, the better that it will get. All right, so defining conflict. Okay, so the book defines it on page 198, defines it as an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from the other party in achieving those goals. So first off, and most importantly, you have to understand it has to be an expressed struggle. So you can't just be in conflict with someone and they not know about it, right? That's just you being angry at someone. I think a lot about people who are bitter at somebody else, or like, they hold this resentment towards somebody and the other person has no idea. I had a pastor one time say, I think in church, that, what is it? Not bitterness, but he used a different word, maybe unforgiveness or something, but bitterness and forgiveness, basically the same thing. It's like poison. It kills you and does nothing to the other person, right? Like we have to talk to the other person. We have to communicate with them in order to express the struggle, in order to even deal with the conflict. Otherwise, you're probably just going to distance yourself. If they don't know about it, then you're just going to sit there in anger. Also, it has to be between two interdependent parties. That means that you have to have some type of dependency on each other. And when we think of dependency, we think of like we rely on somebody. But interdependency can be something as simple as like you go to a restaurant and you have a waiter, and your waiter is, like you're an interdependent party because they are relying on you to pay them, to be kind to them, to, depending upon that, you are depending on them to bring you your food, take your order, do those things. Like all that is still, you're relying on one another, and conflict can arise in that situation. That would be a kind of a smaller picture of an interdependent party. And a bigger version obviously would be like a family member, close friend, romantic partner, someone you work with. But you have to have some kind of connection there. And so to kind of give you the opposite side of that, what it is not, would be like if you like watching politics and you have one of the presidential candidates that you voted for and you don't like the other one, and you listen to news stations that are talking about the other one that you don't like, and you like get mad about this, and you're like, that's not conflict. That's just you not agreeing or you not being happy because you're not an interdependent party with that news station or with that political party member. Right? You don't really know each other. There's no dependency there. There's no interdependency. So that would be the two interdependent parties. And then with perceived incompatible goals, a lot of times it's just because you think that you two have, like you and the other person have different goals in mind, when sometimes if you really communicate it, you actually have the same goal in mind. It's just that you go about it a different way. So that's one reason why we want to communicate our goals with someone, to help, especially in a conflict, to help them understand this is what I'm wanting. So incompatible goals are that, and then scarce resources are like things like time, money, energy. Sometimes you get in a conflict because you feel stressed out and you don't have enough time for this. Like they want to have friends over and you're thinking like, I can't do this. I'm too exhausted. I have work tomorrow and I don't have the resources right now. Or someone wants to buy, like say, like my husband wanted to buy a new car all of a sudden. I'd be like, what? No, we need to plan for this. We don't, we have to save because of scarce resources, right? Or money, that's a resource. So that would be another source of conflict. And then interference from each other. So possibly it might be that you have a group member that you're working with, and they show up late to class and they seem kind of just all over the place. And so you get really frustrated because you feel like they're interfering with your ability to complete your project. But really it might just be that person had to work a double shift and you didn't know it. Maybe their grandparents or a grandparent is in the hospital for COVID, and like they're going through all this stuff and you may not know, but you feel like they're interfering, right? And so another interference might be, say you were trying to communicate with someone, trying to talk to them about something, and they're just really neutral and they won't actually engage in that conversation with you. Like it's like, oh, like say you start talking about I don't know, like me and my roommate are really getting in a fight, but the person's kind of like, oh, I don't want to talk about it. That's your issues and that's your roommate. I'm friends with you both, so I don't want to talk about it. That can kind of make someone feel like you're not really wanting to take care of them, that you're not close. And that's even an interference, like an interference with the relationship, right? And a better way to handle that might just be to say, I can totally understand where you're coming from. Probably be a great idea to talk to your roommate about that. Right? That would be a great thing to do. And so that way you don't feel like you're just being neutral, like you don't care, but actually seem like you're invested in that person as well and that you're trying to be there for them. Okay, so how we talk about conflict. First and foremost, how we look at conflict really defines how we're going to communicate once we're in conflict. So notice that I often say when you're in a fight with somebody, that's actually not how we should view conflict. Like I shouldn't just view conflict as a fight, because if I do, that's how I'm going to manage it, right? If I talk about, oh, I'm in a fight with somebody, and how do you think that you would communicate in that situation? Like you have to probably put up your guns and like get ready to go. Like, let's go, let's do this, right? But that's not really how it should be. Actually, when I was in college, I read a book. I was in a collaboration class, communication and collaboration. And we read a book and it was talking about how important how you phrase or you frame words are. And it was talking about how this business, they hired several employees and they split them up into two groups and they had them play kind of the same game, I guess you could say. And I can't remember what it was, but it had something to do with trading money and trading things, and I don't know. But they had them play this game, and in one group, they called it the collaboration game. The collaboration money game. I'll just name it that. But they called it something with collaboration. And so this group did, like, they were all putting their money in together, working together, saving together. They would like ask each other, hey, here's a good investment. Would y'all want to go in together and do this? And so they all collaborated. This group, on the other hand, the other group, they named it the Wall Street game, or like the something that has to do with, like, you know, you have to really fight for something. But I feel like it was something to do with Wall Street. So everybody was like to each their own. No one collaborated. No one wanted to help each other. They all did it themselves. And the important thing is the game was the same. Like, it was the same exact game. But all the outcomes were different, and how the people managed it was different depending on the name, the collaboration game or the Wall Street game. And you can see how those two things can make you frame your brain differently, frame those words differently, frame the game differently. So it's the same thing with conflict. If we view it negatively, if we say a fight, you know, if we talk about, like, you know, people use rhetoric for the country and say we're at war as a country. If we talk about it this way, that is how we're going to react in those situations. Instead, we should think of it positively. I don't necessarily like the positive metaphors that they say, game, dance, exercise. I don't really like those. But you can still look at it in a way that is positive. I think there is one that I like that they said. Yes, so they said in the book also, conflict can be looked at as an opportunity, as a journey. And I like those kinds of things. If you look at it that way, it makes it better. It makes it easier for you to say, you know what, I'm going to try in this situation. Like, this is going to be an opportunity for us to grow, to learn more about each other, to figure things out so that we don't have to fight about this again, or we don't have to have conflict about this again, right? So think about it that way is going to help you view it more positively and therefore act differently within the situation. Right, reasons for conflict. Parties have different information. So first and foremost, remember we talked about perception a while back. Perception is key with everything with communication. But basically, you don't know everything about what the other person has experienced. So, I mean, remember when I was talking about the friend, like, or the person you're working with in the group member, or the group member you're working with, you don't know what's going on in their life. Like, you don't know if, like, they show up late, they're tired. You didn't know that maybe they did work a double shift. Maybe they do have a family member in the hospital right now. Maybe they do have all this stuff going on and you just didn't know that. You have different information. You also might not know, like, their background. You both have different backgrounds. You're raised differently, right? So maybe you come from totally different family groups and backgrounds. So for you, maybe you had to do a lot of work on your own. And so you are definitely like, I get stuff done. I do it on myself, all those things. You maybe also, you've had past experiences with group members that were really bad, like they didn't work. And so you had to do everything. And so this person didn't know that, you know, you would be really sensitive about that. You know, like, there's just, you have to realize that there's different information about both people that you do not know. And so then that leads us to different interpretations. So the different interpretations, let's see, it says in the book, I think I highlighted something I wanted to say. Even if we have the same information about a situation, we might interpret the experience very differently based on our past experience and the implicit rules we live by. So again, this is even going further depth about what your past experiences are. So say that you were in a big group, and you're talking about an idea you have for the group project, and you had a group member who's kind of just constantly questioning, being like, but what about this? But what if this happens? And are you sure that's the best idea? And you both walk away from that day's work and you're frustrated, right? Like, you're like, why was that person undermining me at every turn? Why are they doing that? And it's because in your past experiences, maybe either in your friend group or your family group, people just listen to each other and they support each other. Whereas with this person maybe has been in groups where everyone really fell into groupthink, where nobody had an opinion except for the one leader. And so maybe they want to be able to ask questions, and they're like, well, I just want to make sure we come up with the best ideas. And so in their head, they walk away like, this was great. Everybody got to have a say, and and they had totally different interpretations of that situation, right? We can go away, walking away from a conflict, and one person can be upset, the other person not realize they upset the other, because we have different information, we have different backgrounds, but we also have different ways that we look at things, different values and things that we want, which then leads us to self-interest. So self-interest, it talks about how, we have the tendency to look for and remember information that is consistent with what we believe or want to see, and to ignore or forget information that contradicts our belief and hopes. So when you start thinking a certain way, it's really easy to go in what's called confirmation bias. And if you're looking in your book, you can highlight that. It's one of the vocabulary words. And this is just a tendency to look for and remember information that's consistent with what you believe or what you want to happen, right? And I see this a lot with, even like this, whenever the presidents were counting all the votes for the presidents and doing all of that. You think about that, everybody was probably watching the news station that they sided with, right? And because we know that there are certain news stations that lead and have a bias certain ways. And so therefore, people, however you voted, you probably watched that news station, right? Because you wanted to be fed with, without even really realizing it, you just want to be fed with information that goes along with what you believe, what you think, and kind of supports that. On the same time, like on a completely different note, I mean, if you have a friend group and there's somebody in the group that you just really don't get along with, and then say your friend does, and you just really don't understand why that person, they like each other, because you're like, this person does all these things, and therefore every time y'all hang out, all you can do is focus on all the things you hate about that other person, and then you keep trying to point those things out, but your friend doesn't look at it that way. They can see them as a whole without bias. Right. So a lot of times when we have this self-interest, we have this, the way I think is best. And therefore, when we're in conflict, if someone's not adhering to what we think is best, that's what causes us to just spiral into that conflict, because we want our own self-interest to be at heart. We want to take care of that. Okay. So going on to, and I'm sorry if you hear my baby screaming in the background, my mom's helping with them. Conflict management, problematic behavior. So there's basically 4 problematic behaviors that are really going to hurt relationships or make conflict worse. And so the first one is criticism. And so criticism and contempt seem kind of similar, but they're a little different. So criticism is the expression of disapproval of someone or something based upon perceived faults in a person or behavior. Okay, so the big issue here, this is something I highlighted in my book, also this is on page 204. And so if you look at criticism, it's a few sentences down. It says, when criticism is focused on behaviors, then it can be constructive and helpful because people can adjust behaviors. However, when criticism is focused on personality or character, then it can be destructive. So it's all about, what are you criticizing? What are you trying to point out as not being good? Are you saying that the person is the issue? Or when you're in conflict with someone, are you saying you are so selfish? Or are you talking about the behavior? Like this, this particular thing really bothers me when you do this. Like say if you're really sensitive about people being late, and your friend's always like 20 minutes late, whenever they meet you. And so you say, hey, instead of saying it's really selfish of you whenever you're to be late all the time, that's like pointing at them and saying you're a bad person. Instead say, hey, this when people are late, when I have to wait a long time, it just really bothers me. And so that way it's not saying that they're a bad person, it's just letting them know, oh, there's a particular action that I have done that as a person, because I can change that, right? So that is why also another thing about criticism that's important is that criticism can also be constructive. It can also be a positive thing, right? Like you can give constructive criticism. You can tell people how to grow, how to be better, especially if you're in a management position. That would be a great thing to be able to do well. But that is specifically what differs from criticism to contempt. So contempt is the expression of insults and disdain for a person, her, his behaviors, and ideas. So this is more so just attacking the person and is never like really focused on anything else. Like you are focused on the individual, and that's what you're upset about. And also, it's never positive. Like contempt is never a positive thing. Like you can't give good contempt, right? You are always doing this in a negative fashion. It's also going to be something that really is harmful to a relationship. This can be done. I mean, contempt can be, you know, what you say, how you say it. It can also be your nonverbal cues, how you look at people, how you treat someone, right? All of those things like kind of happen within conflict. Like if you're the person that's like gives the bad looks and gets really angry and slams doors and does all that, so like that's kind of falls into that category. And so it says in the book on that, hold on, let me see if there's anything I wanted to that I missed. Statements exhibiting contempt often are accompanied with nonverbal behaviors that indicate a disparaging opinion of the person, such as a furrowed brow, a smile, or even dismissive exhale of breath. Expressions of contempt have a universally negative impact on the receiver. So no matter what situation, it's going to have a negative impact on that situation. Okay, so then we have defensiveness. And so defensiveness prevents a person from seeing his or her own roles and responsibilities in the situation and prevents parties from finding common ground when working through conflicts. So basically, this is whenever you, like when you feel, okay, well, first let me say this. Sometimes how we handle a conflict is going to cause someone to be defensive. All right, so that's the first thing. We do need to look at what is our communication doing? How are we talking to them? Are we talking to them in a contemptive way? Then maybe they're going to be defensive. Are we criticizing them as an individual? Also, maybe they're going to become defensive. But so we know that, okay, I'm really trying not to criticize them as an individual. I'm just sharing, you know, what upsets me, or I'm talking about the behavior, those kinds of things. Then we have this idea of defensiveness where the person is just a defensive person, right? Like if you've ever met somebody that basically, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, I think my baby just hit his head. Hang on. Oh, yeah. Poor baby. Okay, back to what we were talking about. All right, so then defensiveness is like if you ever met one of those people that no matter what you say, no matter what you do, they are just going to be defensive. They're just going to be upset about it. They're not going to want to listen. They're going to kind of push away. They're going to always play what we say is the victim, right? They're always going to be the victim no matter how you say it. And so it's important that if you are that person, you need to be aware of that. You know, if you are playing that role where you're just the victim and you don't want to have to own up to anything, we have to be honest and aware and understand that, okay, we're not helping a relationship move forward or get out of this. We're actually hindering a relationship, keeping it in the same place. If we always are the victim because we're allowing our pride to get in the way of understanding that maybe we're not doing everything correctly, right? Okay, and then there's stonewalling. And stonewalling is a complete withdrawal from the conflict, both physically and verbally. So in a minute, I'm going to talk about avoidance. This is different than avoidance. Stonewalling is like when you've already entered into the conflict and then you just kind of like, you decide that you're done. Like you step away, or maybe you just turn away and you aren't talking, you're giving them the silent treatment, those kinds of things. This isn't necessarily the best thing to do. I mean, sometimes maybe it's like you're getting so angry that, you know, I need a break. And the one thing though, the best way to handle this is not just to completely stonewall someone, but to say, I need a break for a minute. Like give me a moment and I'll come back, but I need some time. Like communicate that rather than just leaving the situation or walking away or hanging up or not talking to them. You know what I mean? Like you have to say to the person so they understand what's happening. Because when we just stonewall, that ends up causing the other person typically to push forward harder when you don't want them to do that. Or maybe you do want them to do that, but that's also being kind of manipulative, right? So we have to think about, why am I stonewalling this person, and can I communicate to this person why I need just a break for a second, okay? So, but the main thing here is to understand that we need to communicate it, and it is different than avoidance because this is once we're already in the conflict, not before. All right, then we have conflict management styles. So this is a part that's really important. And even that last slide that I was just talking about, that's really important too, to your paper. Okay, all of these that I was just talking about, like the reasons for the conflict management styles, those are all important slides for your paper. So All right, so basically, if you're looking at your book on page 206, there is this picture here, and you can see all the different types of conflict styles. There's 5, and then you also can see that there is an assertiveness side, and then a scale of cooperativeness, being, obviously going from uncooperative to cooperative, unassertive to assertive. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the upper left-hand quadrant, and it is, or I guess you would say, what is 5? I don't know what I would say on that, but you know what I mean. Upper left-hand side. All right, so then competing. So competing is a conflict management style that treats an argument like something to win, even if the other person is not happy with the outcome. So the thing is with this is some people go into an argumentative, just competing. As soon as you go into the argument, again, it's like you're viewing it as a fight, right? I'm in it to win it. I'm trying to win this. And it's very much a win-lose situation. You will do whatever it takes to win, regardless of how much it hurts the other person, regardless of what you have to say or what you have to do in order to get that, to get the win, right? And that is not good. And especially in an interpersonal relationship, that's going to be very harmful to the relationship. Now, there are moments when it can work, but that's going to be something more like, say you're negotiating how much money that you should make for a job. I mean, it's okay to have more of a competing, not being rude, but like having more of a competitive, like, this is what I feel that I deserve because of these reasons, so therefore I want this much money. That is a little bit more understandable. Still, you wouldn't want to be rude and mean to anybody, but that's like, it's understandable to compete in a way of debating, right? It's like a debate for you. So that could be good, but that's not how we should necessarily handle our personal relationships. And then we have accommodating. So accommodating is going to be the opposite of this. So on the last one too, if competing is going to be the most assertive and the most uncooperative. Okay, so the most assertive, most uncooperative, because you can see on the scale, it's at the top left-hand side. Okay, and then we have avoiding, which is going to be the polar opposite of competing. And this is going to be the most unassertive, but it's still being very uncooperative, right? Because you basically are just not dealing with the conflict. It says in the book that accommodating is a management style defined by a person giving into the desires and position of the other person. With this approach, the manager loses by sacrificing his or her position and desires to those of the other person. So basically, it's another lose-win scenario. Like, they win, you lose, because you just don't want to deal with it. Or both lose because maybe you don't even talk to them. You don't even communicate with them. And so, like I said, that would be avoidance. But like with accommodating, you would be just basically entering into this conflict. They start to kind of push, and you just say, okay, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Whatever. It's fine. And you just deal with it. And the problem with this is eventually that's going to get very frustrating. Eventually you are going to explode, and that is not going to help anybody. It's also not conflict is not having a good relationship, like just not noticing your conflict, not dealing with it, acting like it's not there. That doesn't make a conflict grow, right? And in fact, that's going to also hinder the relationship because you're not allowing both sides to grow and to learn each other better and to develop into a healthy relationship. You're hindering that because you're just allowing the other person to have what they want because you don't want to have to deal with it. So that's also not a great thing. All right, then we have avoiding. And so avoiding is going to be also on that scale. It's going to be, sorry, I messed that up a second ago on accommodating, where I was talking about that on the graph. I messed that up. Sorry. That was the most, competing is most assertive, most uncooperative. Accommodating would be most unassertive and most cooperative. I'm sorry about that. Now we're talking about avoiding, and avoiding would be the most unassertive and the most uncooperative. So avoiding is a conflict management style that involves avoiding the other person, choosing not to express or make a conflict known. This is like where you just don't, like, whereas accommodating, you're at least in the conflict and you're just deciding. Avoidance is somebody who just avoids the situation. Maybe you're trying to avoid the person. Maybe you avoid the I can sometimes be an avoider because I just don't like conflict. So I'll just avoid dealing with the individual, right? I'll just kind of like not talk to them or something, or I won't see them, or I used to just ignore text for really long times because I just didn't want to have to deal with it, or calling a friend, and then, maybe my husband's more of an avoider in that if I start to talk about something that bothers me, he'll usually if he knows something's bothering me, he'll usually just start trying to talk about anything but that. Like he'll just start being like, hey, that movie we watched the other day was really good. Just like, I know what you're doing. Like, I know you're trying to avoid this conversation. I typically just have to cut it and be like, dude, stop the BS. We both know we need to talk about it. And he's like, oh, okay. But that's avoidance. It's just trying not to deal with it at all. And that's definitely not going to help a relationship because it's just basically going to cause a void and cause the two people to go their separate ways. If you can always avoid a situation, it's going to lead to separation. All right, then compromising. So then compromising is getting better. And then collaborating. But I'm going to talk about compromising is here in the center. So it's about all of these. And so a lot of times this is what the best option is going to be, just because we can't always collaborate on every single thing, but I'll talk about that later. But it's at the center. So it's being both assertive and unassertive, but it's also being cooperative and uncooperative. It's basically in the middle. It's not trying to do either one fully. Doing the compromising would be a conflict management strategy by which both sides sacrifice part of what they want while getting something they desire. So this would be like you talking with someone, I want to do this, you want to do that, we're in conflict about it. Okay, look, I will give up this and you can give up that. We can both have this thing that we ultimately want the most, right? We've all had to kind of do that a little bit. So that would be compromising. This is probably the best option in a lot of situations. But the one thing that's bad is that you don't get everything that you want. So it's not necessarily a full win-win, right? But it's not a full lose-lose either. But it's still better than the three before that we've talked about, right? And then we have collaboration. And collaboration is the most beneficial of the conflict management strategies, one that has as its goal, finding a solution that allows both parties to win. So like win in full, meaning that you both have sat down and talked about it, discussed, and worked out a way to make this fully what you want. Now, again, this won't always happen because it just possibly can't. Like say if your friend has some friends in town and she really wants to see, she or he wants to see their friends, and but you want to go out to dinner, and you say that you haven't gone out to eat in a long time and you just really want to go out to eat, and you've been excited about that all Friday, but then her friends come into town all of a sudden and they want to see each other. There's a conflict there because you want to go do this, she wants to do this, but right? And so that can't really be necessarily you can't fully be acceptable of everything, right? You can't do everything that everybody wants. So one thing that you could do is to make it like compromising is say that you sit down and you say, okay, what is it that you really want? Maybe it's not necessarily that you really want to go out to eat. Maybe it's just that you really want a good meal, or you want the specific meal that you've been craving for a long time. And so it might be easy for both people to say, okay, well, how about this? Why don't we order out? We get food from that restaurant and you can get exactly what you want, but we'll all eat at our house so that my friends can come over and we can all talk with each other. That would be a compromise, and that would be a collaboration, thinking about the best way to do it all, because ultimately everyone got what they wanted. But say that you just actually wanted the experience of going out to eat, right? Like that's really what you wanted. But your friend doesn't really want to go out to eat. They want to be at home so they can just sit and talk with their friends, but they want to all be together. So say that your friend's like, okay, look, we can go out at the restaurant, we can go to eat. If you'll eat at this one restaurant that I would really kind of want to go to, and my friends can come, and even though they just wanted to be at home, we can all just make it work. That would be more compromising because everyone's having to give up something, like you're getting to go out to eat, but not at the restaurant that you want. So-and-so's getting to eat where they want, but they're not getting to stay at home like they ultimately wanted, right? And then their friends coming with them. So like that is like everyone's getting something, but it's not necessarily perfect. Like everyone's getting exactly what they want. So that would be a compromising type of situation. But again, both are great, right? Both are good. You worked it out, and probably ultimately everyone will be mostly happy, especially with the compromising. And then everyone will be happy with collaboration, obviously, but sometimes collaboration just isn't possible, right? It's just not possible, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. So I just want to say that. So on your paper, don't feel like you just have to say collaboration is the best thing I could have done here. Because if there's no way to actually have collaborated, to actually said, okay, how can we collaborate this and get the win-win for both? It's okay to say compromising, because in a lot of situations, it will just be compromising. All right, and then finally, now that you know about all this, how can you better yourself? This is also going to be important for your paper. Think about, hey, how do you communicate in your conflicts and the resolution of your conflicts? So the first thing that we need to do is focus on being descriptive instead of evaluative, meaning like use description about what's going on, what's upsetting you about the, like I said earlier, what is it that's upsetting you? What is the action? Not evaluating the person and demeaning them as an individual. That's going to be really important to better a relationship and to keep it where both people aren't angry at each other. Because the more name calling that happens, the more evaluating, the more someone feels less than. That's going to make them obviously not want to collaborate or compromise at all. So make sure that you're talking about more of the specifically what's at hand, not the person. Focus on solving the problem, not controlling outcomes. So it's going to be easy, especially if you're that competitor type person, that kind of that conflict management style. If you are, don't try to control how someone, like what's going to happen. Don't try to make the whole conflict go your way. That's really prideful for us. I mean, like we ultimately all want that. Like we said earlier, we all kind of go for our own self-interest, obviously. But instead, we just want to focus on how can we solve this problem? Even if that means I have to compromise, how can I solve the problem versus how can I control the outcome and get what I want? Focus on both people. And then be spontaneous, not strategic. So what this is talking about is think about the way that you frame things. How do you communicate? Say you help somebody do something, like help them on a paper. Now you need help on a paper. Being strategic would be like, hey, remember whenever I helped you with that paper? Now it's your I need help. You need to come over. Right? That's being more strategic because you're trying to force your way. You're trying to make them give you what you want. With that question, like, remember when I helped you? Though you think it's time that you help me? That's strategic, because then you get what you want. Spontaneous would be more like, hey, I have this really difficult paper that I have. Would you have time to work on that with me? And that's giving them that option to come up with that answer on their own. And sometimes that's scary because sometimes people just don't think about it. But we have to still give the benefit of the doubt. We shouldn't just go into every argument or every conflict trying to force someone to give us what we want. And then express empathy, not neutrality. Again, this is something that can cause, like, we don't realize how much this can frustrate somebody. Say that you are in conflict with someone and they're telling you, well, you know, what behavior you did that really kind of bothered them, or like, you know, and say you're just an accommodator. So you're just like, okay, that's fine. It's fine. I'll do it. I won't do that next time. Okay. And you just kind of become neutral and don't communicate with them or don't really engage in that with them. We think that, oh, I'm just avoiding the conflict. I'm actually really good in relationships, when actually we're probably hurting the other person. Like, it bothers the other person that you're not having this conversation with me. Like, you're going to make the other person not feel heard. So we want to be actually empathetic with them about what it is that they're dealing with, whether that's about us or what they're going through with somebody else. So be empathetic, not just neutral. And then acknowledge equality. Don't be superior. Again, sometimes it's easy to act better than somebody else. Like in a conflict, like you try to act like I know better and you don't, and so therefore I will, you know, and you kind of go into it that way. That's going to make you go into kind of that evaluative versus descriptive type mentality. It's also going to put you in more of a controlling versus problem solving mentality, and you're probably going to be more strategic than spontaneous. And you're probably not going to show a whole lot of empathy. So we don't want to act like we are superior. We want to act like we are both people in the situation. Both people are needing to be heard. Let's both communicate. It means that you have to allow the other person to fully share and you fully listen, and then also ask that they listen to you. And then be professional, not certain. So this means, like, don't try to act like everything is an absolute. It's easy to say you always do this, when actually that person might not always do that. right? So understand that you should say, well, sometimes this happens and it upsets me, versus you're always late, so you just don't care about me. Like, that's a very statement, like, you're always late, you don't ever do this, you're never, like, when you use those absolute word choices, it can be very offensive to a person, because one, we all want to be better. Like, everyone wants to be better. And when we hurt someone, we very rarely intentionally mean to hurt somebody. So just to act like you're always like this is kind of hurtful to hear that. Instead, say, like sometimes you're late, or like or don't even say like the amount. Just say, hey, when you're late, like that, that makes me feel like, I don't really care that I'm just sitting here waiting. Would you mind next time maybe try to text me or something, let me know that you're going to be a little late. That's a totally different way to say, like, you're always late. It's so frustrating, right? Like that, those are two different ways. So instead of trying to act like you were certain about someone's behavior, act like it's provisional, and maybe in this situation you handled it in an incorrect way, but in the future, I trust that you can do it better. And that is chapter 14.